Hi, welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue to talk about costs. And we've already talked on a previous video about total costs, total fixed costs, total variable costs, and total costs. This time, on this video, we're going to talk about the averages, average fixed, average variable, and average total, and the marginal. And so what you might want to do, if you haven't done it before, is you might want to draw a graph of this. And so what you would do is you would draw quantity on the horizontal from 0 to 10, and then on the vertical axis you would attempt to graph the average fixed cost, the average variable cost, the average total cost right here, and the marginal cost. Try to graph all four of those. So you would end up with four different curves on this graph with quantity on the horizontal, and you could make that vertical axis go from 0 to 100, scale it from 0 to 100, and then the horizontal would scale from 0 to 10, and then go ahead and plot those points, and then come back and watch me talk about it. So if you want to do that, you can pause the video now, create the graph, and then come back and watch me talk about it. So if you plotted your graph, here's what it should look like. We're going to have quantity on the horizontal, and then we're going to have average fixed, average variable, average total, and marginal cost all on the vertical. And so it's going to look like this. This, by the way, the one that I just skipped over there real fast, these are the total costs, okay? Total fixed cost, total variable cost, total cost. And I said those were, of course, they're important, but they're not near as important as this next graph, which has quantity on the horizontal and has the marginal cost, average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost all graphed here on the vertical axis. Okay, so let's talk about these curves. So first of all, this is what they're always going to look like, and I'll say more about this on another video. But the average total cost is always going to go down, hit a minimum, and rise. The average variable is going to go down, hit a minimum, and then rise. And then in between here, in between the average total and average variable, in between those two curves is going to be the average fixed cost. And we'll talk about that more in another video. And then, of course, here you have your marginal cost. You have your marginal cost. Now, let's say, and we don't know how to make this decision yet. And by the way, these over here, I know this is cut off on the end of your screen. This is just the key for these curves, so it's no big deal. So just you can ignore this over here. All right, so let's say we don't know how to do this yet, but let's just pick a spot. Let's pick a level of production, and let's say we're going to produce here at 5 units. So we're going to produce 5 units of the good. So here's what you do. You have this curve that has all these curves that have all this stuff going on here, and we need to kind of get kind of tunnel vision and focus in on just one part of the graph, and that is our level of production. So if we choose our level of production to be 5, then what we do is we draw a vertical line, a dotted line going up, and that's where we're going to get this this kind of tunnel vision that I'm talking about. So we're going to get tunnel vision, and now all of this part of the graph we can ignore. All this part of the graph we can ignore. The only thing that matters is the dotted line right here, the tunnel vision. And so then what we do is we come up to where we hit the average total cost curve. That's right here. And we come across and we mark it. And I think, now I'm going to jump around here, so I apologize. I'm just going to go back 2 frames. Let's see, when we produced 5 units of the good, the average total cost was 52. The average variable cost was 42. So let me just go back. The average total cost was 52. So that's what this number here is. That number is 52, is the average total cost when we produce 5 units of the good. Now, let's think a little bit more about that. How can we calculate the total cost? Well, remember that the average total cost is equal to the total cost divided by the level of output. Well, we can do a little bit of algebra on that, and that if the average total cost equals total cost divided by quantity, well, it's also true then that the total cost, if we multiply both sides here by Q, then we can say that the total cost is equal to the output, the quantity, times the average total cost. And let's see, my quantity, my level of production was 5. And the average total cost was 52, and so you would multiply those two together, and that would give you your total cost, which I think is 260. Okay, I think is 260. And so let's talk about where we got those numbers, or what those numbers look like on the graph. Okay, so here's my average total cost. Right here is the vertical part of this graph. My quantity is 5, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that into a square. Right, well, into a rectangle, I guess, really. If I follow this all the way around, what can I say? Well, let's think about this. If we're multiplying the base of this rectangle, which happens to be 5, multiplied by the height of the rectangle, which happens to be 52, well, base times height is equal to area, and in this case, the base times the height is also equal to the total cost, which happens to be 260. So what we can say is that this box represents the total cost, which is equal to $260 if, really important if we produce 5 units. Okay? If we produce 5 units. Now, I'm going to erase what I'm about to write here, but if we produced at 9 units, if we produced out here at 9 units, then my box would go up to the average total cost curve all the way over here and over, and then you'd get this big box right here, and then you would multiply 9 times whatever this number is, and that would be your total cost. That box would be your total cost if you produce 9 units. Okay, but we're not producing 9 units, so we can ignore that. I'm just showing you that there's going to be, different costs associated with every level of production. But we're producing at 5. So if we produce at 5, this box is going to be the total cost. And there it is. 5 times 52 is 260. That's my total cost. Now, what about my total variable cost? Well, if I go back and look at my chart here, my average variable cost is 42 when we produce at 5 units. So let's go back and chart that. Now I'm just going to change my color here. When we were at 5 units, we come up to where we hit our average variable cost curve and come over. And that number is 42, and that's going to be your average variable cost. Now, same thing as we just saw here. My total variable cost is going to be equal to my level of output, or my quantity, multiplied by the average variable cost. Okay, the average variable cost, that's here. That's the vertical part of this square, of this rectangle. Multiply that, which is 42, times your quantity, which is 5. Here's my quantity right here. There's my quantity. And if I multiply the base times the height, if I multiply those two together, then I get the total variable cost. And that would be the area represented by this box, that area represented by that box. So the total variable cost would equal 42 times 5, which is 210. 210. So that would be this. My total variable cost is equal to 210. That would be that box. Okay? And then finally, what about my total fixed cost? Well, let's do the whole thing one more time. Only now we're going to do it here at my level of production, and we're going to go up to the average fixed cost curve. So we come up and hit the average fixed cost, come across, and that's going to give me my average fixed cost, which I have to go back at the chart. I forget what the number was. My average fixed cost was equal to 10. Oh, yes, of course it is, because my total fixed costs were 50 divided by my 5 units of output gave me my average fixed cost of 50. So let's go back and graph that. So my average fixed costs are going to be 10. My total fixed costs are going to be 50. Okay, where did I get that? Well, my total fixed costs are going to be equal to the quantity multiplied by the average fixed cost. Well, the average fixed cost is the height. That's right there. that's 10. That's my average fixed cost. Multiplied by my quantity, that's going to be right here. That's going to be 5. And then base times height, 5 times 10 gives me the area of this entire rectangle, which is going to be 50. Okay, that's going to be 50. So that's going to be my total fixed cost. So my total fixed costs are going to be right here. It's going to be 50. Now, my total fixed costs are another place, interestingly enough, because remember, we know from a previous video, we know that the total cost is made up of the total variable cost and the total fixed cost. So here I have this big box right here is my total costs, and then my total variable costs are the red box. Now, okay, of course, the total fixed costs are down here, but the total fixed costs are also in between total cost and total variable. That is to say, this distance right here from 52 to 42 is 10 multiplied by 5, okay, just like this was 10 multiplied by 5. Right here is going to be, this box is also going to represent our total fixed costs, which of course we said are equal to 50. Sorry if that's a little hard to read. That says total fixed costs are equal to 50. So the total fixed costs you can actually find in two different places. You can find it down here, you can find it up here. And as a result of that, since we can find it in two different places, we're not really going to draw this average fixed cost curve very much. Usually we're not going to include it on the graph because we don't need to, because we can find the total fixed cost right here in between the total costs and the total variable cost. Okay, so that's all very confusing. There's a lot going on that graph. And let me just say one more time, here's the big deal on this graph. The big deal on this graph is the vertical distance. The vertical distance, once you choose level of production, the vertical distance is equal to your averages, okay? Your averages are a distance concept, whereas your totals are an area concept. Your totals are an area concept, okay? So that's pretty hard stuff, and we're going to spend more time doing this on some future videos. I'm going to practice this a little bit more because this is a big deal, and you really got to be able to do this. You got to be able to recognize the different parts of a graph because it's going to be a really big deal when we start adding revenue and start thinking about companies' profits. All right, so this has been another Econ podcast with Mr. Hagan. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you on the next podcast.